Cleveland, Ohio, April 25th, 1967. A man named Sam Garrett owes Don King $600. Not 600,000, not 600 million, $600. The kind of debt that gets settled with a conversation, a payment plan, a handshake. The kind of debt that two reasonable men work out between themselves without anyone getting hurt. Don King was not a reasonable man. What happened on that street in Cleveland on that April evening was witnessed, documented, and eventually placed before a jury of 8 women and 4 men who deliberated for 4 hours before returning their verdict: second-degree murder. King had beaten Sam Garrett to the ground, had stomped on his head while Garrett was already down, had continued until Garrett was no longer moving. Over $600. Garrett died in a hospital 11 days later. King served 3 years and 11 months in Marion Correctional Institution before the charge was reduced on appeal to voluntary manslaughter, and he was released. He was pardoned in 1983 by the governor of Ohio. By then, he had already promoted the Rumble in the Jungle, the Thrilla in Manila. He had already stolen millions from Muhammad Ali, Larry Holmes, and Mike Tyson. He had already become the most powerful man in boxing history. The man who stomped an employee to death over $600 had built an empire from a sport that trusted him with its greatest champions. This is the story of how he did it, and what it cost the sport that led him. Donald King was born in Cleveland, Ohio, on August 20th, 1931, the 5th of 6 children. His father, Clarence, worked at the Otis steel plant and was killed in a workplace accident when a ladle exploded and engulfed him in molten metal. Don King was 10 years old. The insurance money gave the family a brief cushion. Then it ran out. And King, who had genuinely considered becoming a lawyer in his younger years, who had attended Western Reserve University for a year before the money ran out, made the decision that would define the first half of his life. He became a numbers runner. The numbers racket was the illegal lottery that operated in black urban communities across America. A system where runners collected small bets from hundreds of people daily, processed the results, and delivered winnings. It was illegal. It was everywhere. And for a man with King's specific combination of charisma, intelligence, and willingness to operate outside the rules that governed other people's behavior, it was a path to real money. By his early 20s, King was not a runner. He was running the operation, one of the leading numbers bosses in Cleveland, operating gambling houses, building the specific kind of local empire that existed below the surface of a city's economy, visible to everyone inside it and invisible to the authorities, except when the authorities were being paid to look elsewhere. In 1954, a man named Hillary Brown tried to rob one of King's gambling houses. King shot him in the back. The court ruled it justifiable homicide. King kept running numbers. 13 years later, Sam Garrett owed him $600. The jury took 4 hours. King came out of prison in 1971 with a specific understanding of how power worked that 4 years of confinement had not diminished. He had watched boxing from the outside his entire life, understood the economics of it, understood that the fighters, the men who absorbed the punishment, who built the audiences, who created everything the sport sold, were almost never the ones who controlled what the sport was worth. The promoters did. The television networks did. The men who sat at tables and negotiated numbers did. King was very good at sitting at tables and negotiating numbers. His first move was elegant in the way that all of his best moves were elegant. He approached Muhammad Ali and convinced him to participate in a charity boxing match to benefit a local Cleveland hospital. On the surface, a civic gesture from a recently released convict trying to establish himself in the community. The event raised $85,000 in ticket sales. The hospital received $1,500. King's standard cut, 83%, had been applied to the charity money. He had stolen from a hospital fundraiser on his first professional boxing event. Nobody stopped him. By 1974, King had worked his way into position to negotiate the single most important fight of the decade, Muhammad Ali versus George Foreman, the Rumble in the Jungle. Every major promoter in boxing wanted this fight. Ali was the most famous athlete on the planet, recently returned from exile, trying to reclaim the heavyweight championship. Foreman was the most physically dominant heavyweight since Liston, a man who had knocked Frazier down 6 times in 2 rounds and who most boxing observers believed was going to end Ali's comeback permanently. King got it. He secured a $10 million purse through an arrangement with Mobutu Sese Seko, the dictator of Zaire, who saw the fight as a vehicle for international legitimacy. $5 million to each fighter, the largest purse in the history of the sport at that point, and King was in the center of it. He understood something about that fight that most observers missed. The fight itself, Ali's rope-a-dope, the 8th round knockout, one of the greatest upsets in sports history, was not the product that mattered most to King. The relationship it produced was. King had now promoted Muhammad Ali, had been in the room when history was made, had his name attached to something the world would remember. The following year, the Thrilla in Manila, Ali versus Frazier, for the 3rd time, King promoted it. What happened to Ali's money afterward became one of the most referenced examples of what King actually did to the fighters who trusted him. Ali was shortchanged approximately $1.2 million from his purse after the Thrilla in Manila. He filed suit against King to recover it. King sent $50,000 in cash to Ali in the hospital where Ali was receiving treatment, his health already beginning to deteriorate. The cash came with a document that, if Ali signed it, would drop the lawsuit entirely, and also give King the right to promote any future fights Ali would be in. A friend of Ali's delivered the money and the document to the hospital. Ali signed. His lawyer, when he found out, reportedly cried. Ali had settled a $1.2 million lawsuit for $50,000, signed away his promotional future, and done it from a hospital bed where his health was already compromised enough that King's timing was not accidental. Mike Tyson said it directly, years later. He said King did more damage to black fighters than any white promoter ever in the history of boxing. He knew from personal experience. Larry Holmes was the heavyweight champion through the late 1970s and early 1980s. He fought under King's promotional banner for years. When Holmes finally had access to his own financial records, when the accounting was done and the contracts were examined, he sued King for $10 million. $10 million that Holmes said King had taken from him over the years. Earnings that were contractually owed to the fighter and had been redirected through the mechanisms that King had built into his promotional agreements. The fine print that his fighters, most of whom had grown up in poverty and had never had lawyers review their contracts with genuine independence, had signed without fully understanding. One specific incident stood out. A contract had guaranteed Holmes $500,000 for a fight. Holmes received $150,000. He sued. He settled for $150,000 and signed an agreement stating he would no longer say negative things about King in the press. That was the pattern. Sue. Settle for less than what was stolen. Sign a document that prevented you from talking about it. Move on. The sport moved on with you because the sport needed Don King, and Don King needed the sport, and the fighters were the resource that kept both of them operating. The organized crime connections were not a rumor. In 1991, Sports Illustrated reported King's ties to John Gotti, the Gambino crime family boss who would be convicted the following year on murder and racketeering charges. The same article alleged King's connections to Matty the Horse Ianiello, a Genovese family figure. An undercover FBI agent had posed as a wealthy drug dealer and approached King about laundering money through his boxing promotion company. In their first meeting, King's office was accessed through a capo in the Colombo crime family. The agent later met with a member of the Genovese family who said of King, "He's with us." King was indicted for tax evasion. He was not convicted. The fight game understood something the courts could not always prove, that the ecosystem King had built around himself, the promotional contracts, the television relationships, the network of sanctioning bodies and ranking systems that determined which fighters got which fights, was held together by the same understanding of power that had governed his numbers operation in Cleveland. You were either useful to King or you were not, and if you were not getting the fight. Mike Tyson's relationship with King produced the most public accounting of what King's methods actually cost a fighter. Tyson had been managed by Bill Caton and Jim Jacobs through the early years of his career, the years when he became heavyweight champion and built the record that made him the most feared fighter alive. After Jacobs died in 1988, King positioned himself close to Tyson through a combination of personal attention, flattery, and the specific kind of loyalty performance that King had always excelled at, making fighters feel that he alone understood them, that he alone was fighting for them against a world that wanted to exploit them. The irony of that pitch, that Don King was protecting Mike Tyson from exploitation, would become fully visible only later. By the time Tyson was released from prison in 1995, King had become his promoter. By the time their relationship ended, Tyson sued King for $100 million, alleging that King had stolen approximately $35 million from him across the years of their arrangement. The lawsuit settled for $14 million. Tyson said afterward that he had been a fool, that King had come to him speaking of black unity and loyalty and pride, while systematically removing money from accounts that Tyson did not have the accounting infrastructure to monitor closely enough. He called King a wretched, slimy, reptilian man. He said the things he said about King with the specific fury of a man who understood, in retrospect, exactly how the mechanism had worked and how completely he had been inside it without seeing it. The question that boxing has never fully answered is how. How did Don King, a man convicted of stomping an employee to death over $600, a man whose financial dealings produced lawsuits from virtually every major fighter he promoted, a man with documented connections to organized crime figures, how did he become the most powerful promoter in the history of the sport and remain there for 3 decades? Part of the answer is competence. King was genuinely exceptional at certain things. He could get money out of venues and television networks and foreign governments that nobody else could reach. He could put together fights that other promoters could not. The Rumble in the Jungle required skills, negotiation, salesmanship, the ability to persuade a foreign dictator to spend $10 million on a boxing match that were real and that produced a real result. Part of the answer is timing. He arrived in boxing at the moment when the sport's biggest names were also its least legally protected. Fighters who had grown up in poverty, who were managed by people with their own financial interests, who signed contracts in the excitement of championship opportunities without the independent legal review that might have caught the clauses King was embedding. And part of the answer is the sport itself. Boxing, alone among major American sports, had no union, no collective bargaining, no players' association, no external body with the specific mandate and power to protect the people inside the ropes from the people outside them. Don King operated in the space that absence created for 30 years, while Ali's lawyer cried, while Holmes signed documents, while Tyson's accounts were drained, while the hospital in Cleveland received $1,500 from an $85,000 charity event. Cleveland, Ohio, April 25, 1967. Sam Garrett owed Don King $600. He died in a hospital 11 days after the stomping. He was 25 years old. Don King served less than 4 years, was pardoned by a governor, promoted the Rumble in the Jungle, stole from Muhammad Ali in a hospital, took $10 million from Larry Holmes, drained $35 million from Mike Tyson. He is 92 years old. He has never gone back to prison, only in America. That was the phrase Don King used to describe his own rise, the self-made man, the numbers runner from Cleveland who became the most powerful figure in the most brutal sport in the world, only in America. He meant it as celebration. The fighters who trusted him heard it differently. This channel tells the stories that boxing tried to forget, the ones from Cleveland streets and hospital bedsides, and contracts with clauses that fighters signed in the excitement of opportunity and spent careers paying for. Subscribe. Because the most dangerous man in boxing history never threw a single punch. He just controlled the ones who did.